Welcome to the As Promised Photoshop Bootcamp. So to start off, you need Photoshop. If you don't have Photoshop, go and get Photoshop. Go install the Adobe Creative Cloud, as you can see here, and with that you can get free trials of any of the Adobe apps. Through the Creative Cloud launcher, you can launch and install various apps that Creative Cloud provides, obviously Photoshop being the one that you want. Now when you open this Creative Cloud app, if you go to Assets and Fonts, you can actually install various web fonts in here, and I highly recommend checking those out because a lot of the web fonts you can get through Typekit are much nicer and look cleaner than the typical system fonts that most people are used to working with. Now be aware, to actually use Typekit, I believe you need an actual paid subscription to Creative Cloud. I don't think it's available to you with the free trials, so keep that in mind. Now one thing, when you do want to use these in Photoshop and the Adobe apps, make sure you've opened Creative Cloud first and let it synchronize before you actually open those tools. So for the most part, the Creative Cloud app is used to actually manage the licensing of those fonts and your ability to use them. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's open Photoshop. Now the first thing we should do before we actually start learning that much about Photoshop is dive into the settings and make sure that everything is kind of configured in a sensible way before we start using it. So you can get to settings by going to Edit and then Preferences, or you can just hit Control K. Now I'll go through these one by one, or all applicable ones, to show you the settings that I use and some of the things that I change to make my life and my workflow a bit easier. So this section is fine. It's for the interface. Now the color you have the interface is really up to you. I like it here. One thing I would do is change these modes here to be none. So if I put it online, for example, and I make a new document, you can hopefully see here, if I zoom in a little bit, that there's actually a black line on the border of this document. And I don't like that because especially if your banner has an actual border on it, it's kind of annoying because you've got a border on a border. So I definitely turn that off. So if we go to interface and we turn this off, there we go, that is gone. I like having it kind of unadulterated at the border. Okay, back to our options interface. This is all fine. Workspace, this is all fine. Now as for the tools, I tend to turn off animated zoom and turn off zoom with scroll wheel. So now I can zoom in and out by scrolling, which I find a lot easier. Yeah, tools. Okay, I tend to also like zoom click to point to center. So I think this is what actually makes it zoom in on the point that your cursor is actually looking at. Yes, it does. So if I want to zoom in on that corner, I can keep scrolling while pointing in that direction. So I like that as well. Back we go. Okay, everything else I think is fine. History log, doesn't matter. Sync settings, ignore. File handling, this is all fine as well. Export, fine. Performance, now it depends on your system, but you probably want to give Photoshop a reasonable amount of RAM to work with, and you want it to use your graphics processor if possible. These settings are generally all fine. One thing I do tend to do is set the history states a lot higher so that I have many more undo iterations I can kind of roll through. So you can set this to 999 if you want, but you probably will never need that, but I'm going to set it to say 500. Okay, scratch disks. The scratch disks are basically your hard drives, and when you're doing various things in Photoshop, you can have quite a large amount of disk space used by Photoshop, kind of as temporary storage. You should definitely have Photoshop on a solid state drive if you have one. I assume most people are using solid state drives for the operating system drives now. If you don't, well, it's going to be a bit slower, but there's not much point putting other scratch disks here if they're mechanical drives and storage drives versus your SSD. Cursors, now these I definitely change. So if you scroll through these, you can see the tool, the actual cursor for the tools changes. That one is horrible. That one is okay. That one, I don't like it so much. And then there's precise. I kind of like having normal brush tip because it gives the nicest display of what's actually going to come out of that brush. You can put crosshair on if you want. Now for other cursors, I definitely want precise, so if I'm sampling a color with the eyedropper, I definitely want a reticle. Transparency, this doesn't really matter. Units and rulers. Now this does matter, so you're going to be doing web stuff, so you probably want rulers on pixels. Type is fine on point, so typically you're going to use points, but you can use pixels as well. For consistency, just put it all on pixels. Now these resolutions are fine. Your screen resolution is generally going to be 72 unless you're on a MacBook with a Retina screen, but then you probably got scaling anyway, so 72 is going to be correct. Guides, these are fine. Plugins, these are fine. Type, okay, what have we got? This all looks fine to me. And there you go, there's video card settings, so you won't really even have to touch these, and technology previews we don't really care about. Okay, so now that that is done, we're all sorted. I'll close this document. Now that we've changed the actual ruler and measurement settings, if I go to make a new document by going File, New, one thing I want to do here is change this to pixels. I thought that would automatically default, but it didn't. There we go, change that to 72. This is fine on 8-bit, let's do 16-bit. And go OK. Okay, now let's close that and we'll try to make one again. And you can see now it's kind of defaulted to this, which is what we want. Now the one thing I do want to mention is the color mode here. So I can't for the life of me remember which color modes allow which filters and settings, but if you have it on 32-bit, for example, and you think, oh yeah, let's make it awesome, as many color variations as possible, or possible colors, it'll actually change the filters that you're able to use. So if I use a brush tool and I draw some things, and now I go to filters, you can see these are actually all fine. Okay, what am I thinking of? Something changes. Here we go. Okay, so lots of these are missing. I can't do anything with curves, for example. So image adjustments. Now if I go to image mode and I change the actual color bits per channel, don't merge. Now you can see that these are all available. So they weren't available on 32-bit, but they are on 16. So when you're making a new document, you're probably going to want to use 16 rather than 32, because that'll actually disable various features. Okay, now that aside, let's go through the interface. So you have various tools over here, you have various panels over here. All of these panels you control with the Windows menu, and you can set them all on and off here. And what are we going to do? Let's actually organize ourselves. So this color panel here, I don't really use it because you kind of have this color panel here that you can use. So you don't really need that, so you can get rid of that. Swatches, you can use swatches as well for storing colors, but if I'm honest, I don't really use it much at all, but I will leave it there. What have we got here? We have the history tab. This tab is actually awesome. We'll go back to this in a moment. Properties tab, we do want that. Device preview, we don't want that. So let's actually get rid of that tab group. Library, we definitely don't want that. Okay, what else do we want? We want paths, we want channels, we want layers. Actions is useful, so we'll keep this guy here as well. Character and paragraph, I tend to put these on as well, so let's put them here because I like to be able to control my font settings easily. What else? Okay, we'll come back to timeline a little bit later. You can use that for making animated GIFs. Now one thing off the top of my head, just came into my mind. When you go to make a new Photoshop document, the actual width and height here will be the same as any image on your clipboard. Why is this worth noting? Because if you take a screenshot with light shot, as so I just took a screenshot, I'm not actually sure if you can even see that, but I just copied it to my clipboard. Now if I go to new, these are the exact dimensions of the image I just copied, and if I paste, bam, there it is. Some sort of Photoshop inception going on. Okay, let's get rid of all of this. Let's actually do some stuff and use various tools. So let's make a new image, go to OK. Let's actually paste that because we can. Now, what have we got here? We have the layers panel is where you will generally be working. So here you can make various new layers. Always separate things onto different layers if you can. You can make groups to actually group things. If you make lots of new layers and you select them all and click group, it'll put them all in the same group together. Okay, moving on. The first thing I think you should kind of master when you're trying to learn how to use Photoshop are keyboard shortcuts. Like seriously, the hotkeys and keyboard shortcuts will save you so much time. There are single key shortcuts for virtually every tool, and this will allow you to keep your hands on the keyboard and your mouse in your center screen doing the various things that you're doing without getting distracted. So for example, I want to move, and I'll go through the tools as I go. I want to move this layer, so I'm going to click this layer here. Now the first thing I'm going to note here is, okay, let's draw something here. To select this layer, I click it, right? And then when I click it, I can move it. But we can make that faster. So if I want to select this layer, right? What do? I can click that, and now I can move it. There's a much faster way to do that. So if you look up in the top panel here, first of all, when you change tools, the tool presets will actually all change up there. Up here, I have this thing called auto select, and I can auto select by group or by layer. I typically want this on layer, and I don't really want the show transform controls on. Now, if I want to select this layer, if I put auto select on and I click this, note down here, it selects that layer. If I want this layer, it selects that layer. So it automatically selects the layers as I click on them, which is kind of good. But I don't really like that, so I turn auto select off. But now if you hold control, see that control actually toggles that as I tap it. So if I want to select this and move it, I can hold control. Now this is a great way to do it as well, because when you hold control, it actually brings up guides showing you the bounding boxes over everything and the distances and pixels from everything else. Now I can click that and I can move it while still holding control. And I've now selected that. Now I can hold control, click that, and move that, and so on. So get good at using just the basic tools in Photoshop and you'll kind of be a lot faster. Okay, now you'll see these guys here and they're all disabled. Those are the align and distribute tools. These are super awesome as well for aligning things and getting things nice and like consistent. So let's make various boxes. Now if I select all of these boxes, so the shortcuts are just like any shortcuts you'd be used to. They're intuitive. If I want to select all of these, I can control click them all, or I can just shift click. Now if I go to the move tool, you can see that these are now all lighted up and enabled. This aligns them all horizontally. There we go. This here aligns them at the bottom. This here aligns them all at the top of each other. This aligns them all vertically. And this distributes their centers. This distributes their vertical centers. So those are super handy as well. Now, moving on to the tool hotkeys. For select, this is V. So tapping V will actually select this. This is the marquee or the selection tool, marquee being M. Now, right now I've selected some sort of area. To deselect, you want to use Control D. So that's one of the most annoying things if you don't know that shortcut. When you select things and you want to get rid of that selection, it's Control D. This tool is lasso. You're probably not going to use it very often. What is this tool? The magic wand tool. You probably won't use that too often either. Crop tool, probably C. You can see it there. Eyedropper. So eyedropper being for selecting colors, and you can see the foreground color changing here. Now on the note of colors, tapping X swaps the foreground and background color, and if I were to change these colors, pressing D resets to black and white, and X to flip. So D is a useful key to know as well. Now as for these tools, you probably won't use all of these. You'll probably use the brush tool quite a bit, brush being B. Now notice here this is disabled because I can't paint on this shape object. It's kind of like a live path object and I'm not allowed to do that. If you ever want to do that with text or shapes and things, what you can do is essentially flatten them. Now to flatten them and remove that dynamic, those dynamic attributes, if I go to properties here, I can actually change various things about this shape, for example. It's that one there. I can actually round the corners on it, for example. There we go. I can modify those things because it's a live shape. If I want to get rid of that, I can right click on it and go to rasterize layer. And now it becomes a normal shape like anything else. Okay, on that note, what was I talking about? Rasterizing layers. and drawing things. Okay, so if we go to the brush tool with B, here we have a brush. Another shortcut to know that's useful are the square bracket keys. These change your actual brush size. So when you're trying to blur things and you're trying to paint things, you don't need to go up here, click this, change this size. That's really, really annoying. Just use these square bracket keys to do this on the fly. What else have we got? Eraser tool, pretty self-explanatory. Gradient tool, so you probably use the gradient quite a bit. Up here, if you click on the actual gradient here, you can open various presets and you can change the type of gradient. So you might want a linear gradient. Oh, that's not linear. Linear gradient. FYI, when I'm drawing this, if you hold Shift, it locks it to 90, 45, 0, or whatever, whatever your reference point is, degrees. And radial, and so on and so on. You don't need to worry about the modes too much, but be aware that every layer can have a mode. So we have these various modes in here. You can kind of explore these yourself. They all have different ways in which they work. Screen, for example, where's screen? Screen essentially removes black from the actual layer. Color causes the color of that layer to then influence everything below it. So for example, if I was to make this red, and then I set this. Okay, so another thing before I get onto that, first of all, don't worry about this. If you go to opacity, this is the transparency of that layer. Opacity and transparency are just inverses of each other. Fill is kind of a bit different. Fill doesn't change the opacity of the layer, but actually changes the fill of it. And the practical situation when you would use this is when you're using layer styles. So to give you an example, if I hit Control T, which is transform, and I go to transform this layer and shrink it down, and tick. Now be aware that just then, so I undid that using Control Z. Be aware that Control Z toggles back and forth. So if you want to keep going backwards, you need Control Alt Z. And if you want to go back forwards, you do Control Shift Z. Okay, there we go. So now for this layer here, if I want to do a layer style, I can actually right click this and go to layer styles, wherever that is, or I can just double click it, which is what I prefer to do. No navigating menu. Here we go, various layer styles. Say if I want to do a stroke, I'll make this reasonably big, and I want to do a drop shadow and make that drop shadow big as well. Now if I change opacity, this changes the transparency of the entire layer. But if I want to change just the fill and not affect this layer style, this is where I use fill. So that is how they are different. Fill does not affect layer styles and modifications. Okay, that aside. Now also, when you're working with layer styles, be aware that editing this layer, like if I use a brush tool and draw out here, it'll actually edit the stroke and the drop shadow, which is why you can see it kind of being a bit weird. You can see here because of the layer style. If you want to actually stop the layer style from changing, what you can do is rasterize that layer or rasterize the layer style, since the layer is already rasterized, and that removes that kind of dynamic styling. Okay, now let's get rid of that. We'll hide it. Okay, brush tool, we're on the gradient tool. Don't think I need to tell you much more about that. If you want to edit this tool, or edit this actual gradient, you can just click on this guy here, and you can set the various stops and transparencies and so on that you are actually dealing with. This top one is the opacity, and this bottom one is the color. All good. Now, the gradient tool, one of the nice uses that there is for it is when you're doing a quick mask. So let's say I want to fade out part of this image, right? So I kind of want to do a situation where it's transparent here, or completely transparent, and then kind of fades in. The easiest way to do this, in my opinion, is to use a quick mask. So you can use layer masks and things, which you do with this tool here, but I won't get into that. If I want to do a quick mask, I can hit the Q button. Now when you hit Q, you can see up here the actual mode changing. When I go to quick mask, black is essentially What is black? Black is completely transparent and white is completely opaque. So if I click, first of all, these modes here are background to foreground. So if I click on this one here, for example, and I change this color, you can see it changes foreground to background. Actually, I'll get out of quick mask because that's a bit confusing. Here, for example, there you go. So if you want just foreground to background, this is what you do. Now let's go to quick mask. If I hit D to reset, now if I make a gradient, so I'm on the gradient tool. If I make a gradient like this, oh no, we're on that. You can see here that it's got this kind of red mask. That red mask is, it's not an actual fill because I'm in quick mask mode. If I tap Q again to get rid of that, it now makes a selection that's based on that quick mask. If I hit delete, I'm going to actually apply that mask and delete that content. Now that was kind of the reverse way to what I wanted. So if I hit Control Alt Z to reverse, if I want to invert that selection, I'll do Control Shift I. There you go. Easy peasy. Okay, so I know a lot of this will be a bit boring for some of you, especially if you're experienced with Photoshop, but what I want to do was kind of just give you a rundown of many of the basic little things that I would use day to day whenever I'm doing Photoshopping, because they're things that you don't necessarily get taught and it slows you down having to navigate through menus to actually find things. Okay, so let's delete that layer by just tapping delete. We can delete that entire group. We can delete that group as well. And okay, here note this padlock symbol. That means that double click there, that background is locked. The background, when you open an image, it's usually a background layer and it's locked. The easiest way to get rid of that is to generally right click on it and go new layer from background, although that's not in here because this isn't a background, because it's a new document, not something I opened. Okay, now let's actually do something useful. Okay, I want to teach you about the history tool. So here you can kind of see all of the various things that I've done in the past, my sort of history states. If you actually click through these, you can roll back through the various states of your document. And on that note, and this goes through various states, I can't for the life of me recall if this is actually saved in the documents. I have a feeling it's not. But in any case, you should always have your Photoshop files in your Dropbox so that when you're saving, it's actually synchronizing. So if you do something silly and you want to roll back through a revision, you actually can via Dropbox. Now, there's all these history states, right? So what we can actually do is use this thing called snapshots. So if I, first of all, I can expand that if I want to keep that there for convenience. Let's say I make some shapes and I keep them like that. I can make a snapshot of unarranged. This goes up here at the very top. There's my snapshot. Now let's say I hit the V tool and I move some of these into the corners. There we go. If I hit another snapshot, I have another sort of image of that rendition or arrangement. So if I toggle between these, it makes it very easy to change between compositions of a banner, for example. And now if I was to select all of these, I can select all of them by clicking like this. Sometimes things will be nested in groups and all over the place and it'll be hard to find the exact ones in here, especially if you're not naming. So again, you can just use the same controls you always, that intuitively you use in like Explorer, for example. Control click selects that, Control click selects that, Control Shift selects everything I click on. Now if I want to align them all to the right, we can have a snapshot. If I want to align them all to the left of each other, snapshot. If I want to align them all horizontally to make a pretty useless box, there we go, another snapshot. And then I can go between them. Now the snapshot doesn't save everything. There's some things that it doesn't actually save, like it saves layer positions. I'm not sure if it saves layer styles. So if I click this and then I say double click on this, and I make this guy have a stroke, we make that stroke red, and then I save that snapshot. If I switch between them, yep, it saves layer styles as well. That is great. What else? What if I make this layer slightly transparent? it saves that as well. I have a feeling with each Photoshop upgrade and iteration, the snapshots will get even better, but it may not save delete. So if I delete those and then snapshot, what will it do? No, it saves the deletes as well. So these snapshots are pretty awesome, to be honest. Does it do visibility? Yes, it does. So you can use these snapshots for a lot of banner making, where you're actually kind of moving things around, you're perhaps changing the styles of buttons. You can actually save these snapshots. But this is the key thing here, which I think I encountered when I was first playing with snapshots. I don't think snapshots are actually saved in your Photoshop documents because they're part of the actual history, which is not. So if I save this, and I'll just do that quickly, and we go to our Photoshop Bootcamp, we'll just save it as Untitled 1. I don't really care about maximizing compatibility because no one else is using these. Okay, there we go. Now if I close this, closes Control W just like in browsers, and I go no. Now if I open recent, there we go. The snapshots are gone. So don't use snapshots to kind of permanently try and save your compositions and renditions. That's not a good idea. To do that, what you kind of want to do is use groups. So if I group this, and I have this rendition, if I want that to be stored permanently in the file, my different variations, I want to actually duplicate that group. So I can duplicate the group by clicking and dragging to this new layer button. And then in here, I can just edit things like so. And now if I want to look at that rendition, I can look at that, or I can look at that by toggling the visibility. Now, let's say I have multiple renditions, so I have, or multiple arrangements, multiple banners. Let's say I move this one around here, and then in this one, I move this guy over here. So we have all of these different kind of arrangements, and I want to export all of these as banners. Now, there's no simple way to do that for groups. If I go to File and then Scripts, I can go to where is this? Okay, so here we go. It's an export and layers to files. So here I can export to a specific folder with some prefix in some format. I don't really need to include that, and I can run that. Now, you don't really want to run that when you have this kind of system here where you have lots of live shapes and things. You really want just layers. So you kind of would need to rasterize these things before you export. Otherwise, it will try to export, rather than this composition, it will try to export each one. And it's actually probably going to fail a bit miserably when you have these live shapes. Now, to actually make this easy, what you can do is have your variations and your banners sort of in different groups so that you can toggle them easily. And you can just flatten this entire group into a layer. To do that, you can just click on the actual group and hit Control E, which is merge layers. So if you hit that on this group, notice it's not working. Why is it not working? Probably because these are live shapes, not and unable to be merged. So I'm going to hit rasterize layers. I can probably hit rasterize group. I'm not sure if I can. Nope. Okay, let's just rasterize those layers. Now if I hit Control E, what is it doing? Oh, does it need to be visible? Okay, it needs to be visible. Can I merge without those as rasterized? Yes, I can. Okay, so it was because it wasn't visible. That was my mistake. So I can merge that as well. I can merge that as well. There we go. Now we have these as layers, and I can merge that guy as well. Now if I go to File, Export, Layers to Files, and run that, what it does is it kind of splits them into different files, and then it saves them, which is why it's doing the crazy things it's doing. And then it will tell me when it's finished. There we go. And then in the folder for that, you can see some exports I was doing before. You can see that these all actually exported right here. Okay, I'll delete those. Okay, now let's go backward a bit. Control-Alt-Z and bring those back. Up here we have swatches, right? So if I click on these swatches, it actually changes the foreground color here, which changes the color in the actual tools that I'm using. Now if I want to change this actual path, I have to change this here, and you can see my swatches here. I'm not sure where that is. That guy's hidden. There he is. Now, one thing I can do is give this guy a style. So rather than just a color, I can give him various styles, right? I could give him a drop shadow, a stroke, and so on. Typically, you're going to want to save these so you can apply them easily in the future. Now, to do this, you're going to use the Styles panel, which I will bring up. I'm going to put him in here next to the swatches. I don't need adjustments, I don't need libraries, so I'm going to close this tab group. Now, in Styles, you can see there's a number of different things here. The ones that come with Photoshop are terrible. Like, these are just hideously terrible. So I'm not going to delete those, but what I am going to do is load in some other styles which I've downloaded. You can get these off the internet from wherever you want, but I'll give you some styles for buttons anyway. So these are here. I can just click and drag these straight into my styles palette here. And there we go. Now I'm going to expand this a little bit. Usually I like to have the layers kind of as tall as possible just for navigation. You can see all these styles here. So there we go. These are much nicer button styles, and you can just click between them to actually apply them. And you can probably do this with snapshots as well. So if we already know you can. If I make that snapshot there, then I change this to be blue, and I make a snapshot, and then I move some component of my banner around, and I decide to do a green button, make a snapshot. There you go. You can essentially swap between these. And you can't use the export as layers function, but what you can do is remember that again that these don't save in your Photoshop document, so you can't store them. What you can do is go to a snapshot and then export for web. To do this, you go export. You can do quick export as PNG, but you can also go export as, which brings up the export panel. You might be doing PNG, you might be doing JPEG, and so on and so on. Now remember I mentioned Kraken.io in the toolkit. Whenever you're doing banners, speed is kind of the name of the game no matter what you're doing. So pass all of your banners through Kraken. If you're doing anything where there's transparency, I recommend saving as PNG 24, which is this, and then passing that through Kraken as well. But I can use the shortcut key here, which is Control-Alt-Shift-W for export. And then I can change to that one. I can go to export, and so on, or you could quick export. So they kind of all have their uses. Right. Okay, so one thing we haven't gone over at all yet, and I'll just collapse this because I don't really need it. I like having some of these on pop out rather than taking up my screen real estate. The text tool. I'm seeing transform here, so let's talk about transform. To do transform, you just hit Control-T, which is free transform, and it brings up the transform controls. Now I can move around. Now I can resize in whatever mode. There's various key toggles you can do to change the way this actually occurs. If you hold Shift, it locks the aspect ratio, which is pretty typical. If you hold Alt, it does it from both sides to do a symmetrical transformation. And I'm not sure what happens if you hold Control. If I hold Control, it forces it to move. Oh no, there we go. If I hold Control and when I click on one of the handles, it goes into perspective sort of distortion. So it distorts the handle directly rather than anything else. So if I click this, it resizes, but if I hold Control, it allows me to actually modify that point. So you only really need the free transform. The free transform lets you do a lot of things. All of the settings are up here. I can change the position, I can change the width just holding my arrow keys. I can also hover over one of these and you see this little icon appear, and if I click and then move left and right with my mouse, it actually controls it as well. So you can kind of use your mouse as well to control how things are moving around. Very intuitive. Now you might notice this thing here. This is the anchor point. So let's give you an example. Say I'm rotating, right? Now I'm pressing up. Now I'm pressing Shift up, which kind of makes the unit a bit higher. I don't know if I can do Alt. What about Shift Control? No, let's just do Shift. So okay, let's drag. When I'm dragging around here, hopefully you can see, and if I hold Shift it actually does it faster, that's convenient. If I hold Shift, you can see it's kind of rotating around the center, right? Now if I change this anchor to the top left corner, and now I try to rotate, you can see that that is the anchor point of that object. If I switch this to this side here, there you go. So this makes it handy for actually moving things. So say I have this object here, and it's flush against this corner, and I kind of want to extend it out a bit. What I can do is hit Control T. I can set the anchor to this point. I can actually lock the aspect ratio between width and height, and now I can actually scale it out from that edge. So there's all these nifty little intuitive controls which help you have control over, all of the various operations that you're doing. Now the type tool. So I hit T for type. First of all, here you select the font. You can see these here are my web fonts from Typekit. If I click this button here, it actually only shows the ones from Typekit, which is pretty handy. Let's use refrigerator, for example. Now I can click to type, or I can hit escape and cancel, or I can click and drag to make an area type, where it kind of makes a paragraph. Now it's going to type in whatever color I have selected. And I can select it all and change the color here at any point in time. Now there's a few things here you should be aware of. First of all, there's various settings in here that you can change in the character actual panel, but up here I can change the actual the font weight. Notice this isn't doing anything, and that's because it's only going to affect new things that I type. If I want to do them all, I have to select the entirety of the text and do that. It's not going to work if I have multiple types selected, so if I want to make that heavy, I just select that. Or I can do the whole thing at once if I'm not inside the editing function. So I can either click this tick to go, okay, that's good, or I can hit Control Enter, which is generally a bit easier. So if you're typing and then you want to say save that, you don't actually have to take your fingers off the keyboard and then click this. You can just hit Control Enter. Now I can actually change these up here, and if I can actually just click and drag to select. If these are different font weights, you can see here, again, I can't do this. So if I want to actually change the font weight there, I have to actually select in here. And the easiest way is probably actually going to be just changing the font completely like that to kind of override. And then go to whatever you want. Okay, here is the font size. Like usual, you can either change in a menu, or you can change by writing it in directly, or you can hold the up and down arrow keys, or you can click and drag here to change it on the fly by dragging. Now here, this is essentially the aliasing mode. So changing between these will change the appearance of the font. If I go to none, there's no anti-aliasing. If I go to sharp, crisp, strong, smooth, you can kind of see the font changing a little bit. Now this is quite a profound impact when the font is kind of small and on a button. So say if I make this light and I make this quite small. Now also when I hit Control T and transform this, be aware it doesn't sort of lose any data. It actually just changes the font size. So here it's kind of just rescaled it, so you don't lose anything when you're doing that. However, note if you actually scale this kind of like this, and then agree with that, then you actually lose a bit of functionality here. So if you actually want to stretch things out, don't do that. Use this actual character panel here. So if I hit Control Z, here if I want to actually stretch the font out, I can do that here. And you can see that this is kind of hyphenating. So I hate hyphenation. You turn that off in the paragraph tab. And this is because this text box is too small. So let's actually expand that text box. Notice here it's not stretching like before because I'm in the type tool, not Control T for transform. If you want to stretch the actual font, you can use this. So 300% for example. That's where you stretch it so that you have that control still. If you want to space things out, you can use this here. And this is the line height and so on and so on. Now you can see here that this kind of looks a bit crappy. Now if I go to the type tool and I change the aliasing mode, you can kind of see the effect here. That's a little better. That's quite light. And that's much sharper. So that looks, at least, I don't know what it's going to look like in the video, but on a button that looks a lot nicer to me than that does, for example. So the actual mode that you're using here kind of does matter when you're at full small font sizes. Okay, moving on from that, you can just explore these tools and figure things out yourself. Now, if I want to move this around and align this with things, it's easiest to just hold Control, click it, move it around. Say I want to put it on this black box and I want to center it. Note that it's not showing, right? It's because it's behind it. That's because in the layers section, this is actually below this rectangle here, which is rectangle 4. Now there's a quick shortcut to actually move this up and down. You can drag it, but you can just use the control and square bracket to move it around, or control shift bracket to move it in a big jump within the tier that it's in. There you go. So I'm going to move it here. I'm going to then move it here. The easiest way to actually align with this block would probably be to hit T, change it to align, change it to center align, hit V to go back to the selection tool, control shift click this box to select them both, and then hit the vertical align to actually pull them together. Now in tools like Adobe Illustrator, it's much easier to actually set the parent element that doesn't move, so everything moves relative to it. I'm not sure if you can do that in Photoshop, but if I click this and then hit that, no, it doesn't do it. So for the life of me, I can't even remember how you do that, or if you can even do that in Photoshop. But if you center those, you can then move them. Now if you want to lock layers together, you can select them all, and then you can click this, where's the link button? There's the link button there. Now those are kind of locked together, so if you select any one of them and you try and move, it moves all of them. And you need to, if you click any of them and click unlink, it unlinks it from the chain. And if you want to do all of them, you need to do that. And of course you can lock layers using this button here. It pays to learn like various shortcuts like lock, for example, so you can click on a background or click on an object and then just hit lock. To do this, let's go to layer. What have we got? Where is lock layer? There we go, control slash. So I want to move that, now I want to lock it. I try to move it, it says no way Jose. So these little shortcuts just will save you a lot of time. Now, that aside, let's actually do something kind of useful. Let's close this, control W, no. Let's make an image. So let's make a 300 times 250 add image and go to OK. Again, this image is on, what mode is it? 8 bits. You can use 8 or 16. It's honestly not going to matter. Just use 8. Okay, so I want to make an ad image. I'll go through now some basic things I would do when I'm making an ad, and when, for example, I'm trying to do some basic editing and enhancing to kind of make that ad pop a little bit better. So I've got this image here. It's gaming related, so let's throw this in. Now, in terms of getting images into your actual Photoshop documents, there's several ways to do this. There's you can place it by clicking and dragging, and then when we click and drag in, it brings up the place tool. Here you have transform controls, so you can actually transform it before you actually put it in. You can lock the actual, I recommend locking the aspect ratio here when you're doing this, and I'll just resize it down a little bit, and then you can just hit tick. Now this here, notice that it has this kind of icon here, which actually means it's linked to that source. Now if I double click this, and you can see here, after editing content, choose File, Save to commit the changes. So this actually opens that file directly. So it opens that file in Photoshop. Now if I want to edit it, for example, by changing the hue. Now to change things like the hue and to do various image wide effects, you can go to Image and then Adjustments, for example. So I can go to Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, which is Control U. I can click Preview so I can see what's happening. Now here, say if I make it kind of gaudy, boost the saturation up to make it look terrible, and click OK. If I hit Control S, it's going to ask me what settings I actually use. I'll just go OK. If I go back in here, notice that it's changed because these are actually linked. Now if I go Control Z and save, there we go, it's linked. Now let's talk about how I might turn this into an ad, for example. So this is just some random image that I pulled out of nowhere, kind of, because it's a good test image. So let's say I want to advertise some sort of game, and I want to tell you to actually install that game. Let's say I use this image, and it's just a typical display banner. First thing I'm kind of going to need is a button. So let's make a shape. We don't worry about any of this, we just make the shape for now. Get rid of that, and I'm going to move it to where I want it. Say I'm just going to make it completely centered. No, I'm going to make it over here. Now I want that to have look a lot nicer, so I'm going to use my layer styles. And I'm going to find something that kind of contrasts with the background well. And the background's kind of purple and blue. Contrasting colors would be yellow and orange, so I'm going to use this one, for example. No, I'll use this one. Okay, I kind of want rounded corners, so if I open up properties, I can, first of all, this links the corner radiuses, 10 pixel, there we go. Let's make it a little bit smaller, 5 pixel. There we go. Okay, I don't need to modify any of this, that's kind of set by the layer style. There we go. Now, since I'm making multiple compositions, let's make a group. Let's put this rectangle in that group. Now, I want to put some text there. Play now, for example, which is terrible, or whatever. And go OK. I'm going to move this down here. I'm going to just hit Control T to resize it. And then I'm going to select both of these, and I'm going to horizontally and vertically align them. And there we are, good. Now, I kind of want that to be a bit bolder, that text, so I'm going to change the font weight. There we go. Okay, so say I wanted to make this text pop a little bit more, I could double click this and add a drop shadow. If I add that drop shadow, I can set the angle to say -45. This is kind of on decent settings. Distance 1, size 1, this is the size of the blur. And this is the distance from the actual text. Obviously that looks terrible. So if I do 1 or 0, it kind of looks a bit better. 1 is kind of not exactly what I want it to be like, so maybe I'll do something like that, just like a little bit of a darker edge there, which then makes it pop a little bit better and looks like it's a bit embossed inside of the actual button. You could actually try and use the bevel and emboss and use the pillow emboss, but I don't recommend trying to use this. I hate the bevel and emboss. The other way I can do it is I can do it manually. So if I click an actual layer and I click its actual icon, it makes a selection of that layer. Now this is something I didn't really talk about, but if you hit Control D, that deselects. If I hit Control Shift I, it inverts the selection, whereas Control I is actually invert image. So if I go, and you can see the smart filters there, get rid of that. So if I Control Select this and I make a new layer, I move this layer below and I zoom in a little bit. What I can do is I can hit X or hit D to reset colors. Now I can use the fill tool, which is Alt. You can go to edit and then fill, which is Shift F5. Alt backspace is actually the shortcut for fill with foreground color, which you can see there. What I can now do is actually move that layer up and to the side there, which gives me a kind of different approach to doing this shadow. And then I can change the opacity directly there. And that kind of makes it pop a little bit better, but it's probably easier to just use styles. Okay, so that's what I have for the moment. Now let's think a little bit about animation. If I bring up the window menu and go to timeline, I can see this timeline panel. Now what you want to do is actually make a frame animation and create one. There you go, there's your actual frames down the bottom here. This is where you get various settings like how often you want to repeat when you save the animated GIF or GIF. I'm going to make multiple frames, so let's make 20 frames and I'll delete that one. Now here's one cool thing you can do. Say if I go to frame 20 and I move this button, this text, I move this entire group up to here. If I now select all of these, I can click this little button here, which is create a tween, and tween the animation frames, and I click that. It'll actually detect the difference between the start and finish and kind of give you a gradual change in position. So if I click play, there you go. Now if I put this to repeat forever, that is what an animated GIF, if I export, would look like. And I can set the actual delay on each of these frames. So if I select all of them and I go to 0.2 seconds, this is going to be much slower. And of course if I put it down to 0, it just animates as fast as possible, or at least there's some, I don't know if 0 seconds is actually a specific delay, or if it just plays as fast as humanly possible on your PC. There we go. Now I'm not sure I can do what I can actually do that with. If I go here and I change this layer style, which I did that to the entire group. That wasn't what I wanted to do. If I change this rectangle and select all of these, then hit tween. Look, it actually tweens the colors as well. That's pretty cool. I didn't realize that. Isn't Photoshop awesome? What about if I get to the end here? And you can click between these frames to change things if you want to kind of make a smooth animation somewhere, and then here in the middle you want to make another thing appear, and then you want it to... No, I don't know if you can actually delete that on certain frames. No, you can't, so you can't do that. I wonder if you can make it visible and invisible. Yes, you can toggle the visibility in certain frames. So if I select all of these, I untoggle that, you can see that actually, very intuitive, that turns it off in all frames, and then in 9 to 13, toggle the visibility. There we go. So it's actually pretty easy to make animations. Now I can probably do outer glows and things as well. So if I go to the end here and I edit the style of this actual layer, not that layer, sorry, this one. Also you can actually toggle the styles here, so you can turn them all on and off, or you can turn off just specific ones at a time. Now if I make this have some interesting outer glow, for example, now how do I actually add an outer glow here? Why is that missing? Okay, I want show all effects, not just the ones that are enabled. Outer glow, and I give it a nice big glow. Now if I select all of these and I tween again and play, so that's pretty cool. So you can do a lot of things there. Like if I wanted to make that glow pulsating, for example, let's get this here and let's move its position back. Oops, and move its position back. There's probably a way to revert its position to what it was originally, but I have no idea what that key is. Now if I tween these, they're all nice and happy. What I can do is I can probably here at the 10 mark actually set the outer glow. So here the opacity is what's changing. Let's set that to 100, and then here I can probably set this outer glow to 0 to give a pulsating effect. Oh, I forgot to tween. Oh no, that kind of broke it because I kind of blurred them all together. So if I go back to my number 10, which has my glow, and I tween just those, and then between 10 and 20 I tween just those. Now let's see what happens. There we go, that does what I wanted to do. So now I've got a pulsating effect. So it's pretty cool. You can do animated GIFs and things pretty easily in Photoshop. Totally recommend doing that because it gives you a nice amount of control over everything that you're doing. Which obviously makes your life easy for banners. Be aware that some mobile advertising sources have restrictions on how your animation can actually go. So you can't use things which are overly like flashing and disturbing. Like you can't make this button, for example, like do this kind of thing. Like that thing is that kind of flashing, generally not allowed. You typically can't make it repeat forever. You usually have to let it only repeat 3 times, which is what you do here. Now if you wanted to export that, you just go Control-Alt-W, the export as menu, and would save it as a GIF. And here we go, let's go export, let's save it here. And now if I was to actually view that, okay, not Internet Explorer, thank you very much. There we go, get out of here, get out. Okay, so that's not animating. Why did that not animate? Let's save it as instead. So maybe the export as menu doesn't do that anymore. You could go to Save for Web Legacy, which I'm pretty sure does that. So let's go to GIF 128 differed. Where is animation? There we go, there's the animation options here. So that's definitely exporting with some sort of animation. So let's go to Photoshop Bootcamp and we'll replace that one. Now if we open it again, you can see it's 55 kilobytes. There we go. There is our animated GIF. It looks pretty terrible, as we kind of can expect. So that's how you can make an animated banner. Now, moving on. Let's touch things up a bit and make things look a little nicer. So I kind of do a bit of touching up on images whenever I'm making ads, which can be time consuming if you kind of don't have a process or don't know what you're doing. One thing you can do is play with the brightness and contrast if you want to actually make things a bit brighter, for example. Make things more flamboyant. Another cool filter is under image, you can go to vibrance. Now vibrance is kind of like a wow factor, so if you put this up, it kind of just enhances the colors. So if you unpreview and preview here, you can see what it's kind of doing. It's just making things a bit more, like oomph. Okay, now one thing I also tend to do is kind of exaggerate the bright and interesting parts of the image and try to give things depth of field and get rid of elements which distracting. So on this image, if I want to actually do stuff to this image, if I click the blur tool, I can't do anything because it's kind of a linked file. So if I click, it actually lets me know I can rasterize it. So I'm going to go OK. Now I can actually do things, and this is just blurring. And to make my life easier, I can hold the bracket tool or the bracket key to make this bigger. There we go. That kind of blurs. What I might do here is blur these characters so that they are kind of less in the way, they're less distracting. So I'm just going to click here, and I'm actually going to click a few times here, then I'm going to click here, and I'm going to hold shift and click down here, and that's actually going to draw a path between those 2 points, and I'm going to keep holding shift and keep actually just clicking up and down to blur over this area. Hopefully you can immediately see that this has made her a lot more of the focal point of the actual image. So if I go back and swap between these, you can see the clear difference there in terms of the actual depth of field of that image. Now another thing I like to do on images is use the amazing magical content aware fill tool. So first of all, let's just blur a little bit of that as well. Alright, before I get to content aware, here's another thing I might do. So here you have the color dodge and burn tool. So the dodge tool makes things brighter. So if I was to click and hold this, you can see this kind of makes things brighter. What you could do here is you could make these kind of fancy things a little brighter by just tapping click around to make them a bit brighter, make your face a bit brighter. And then you could switch to the burn tool to darken certain parts if you want to, if you're that way inclined. So those tools I kind of use as a bit as well. And the difference you can see here is, if I go back to before I did that, there's the difference. So obviously it's not a big difference here, but in some images I like to actually color dodge and burn various parts of it just to kind of make it pop in different ways. Now the content aware tool, oh my god, it's probably one of my favorite tools in Photoshop. If I select these people, right? Say I don't like these people and I want to remove them. Say I want to remove this guy. I can select that area with the lasso. Now fill is Shift F5. If I hit Shift F5, here I can change the type of fill I'm doing, the foreground, black, or the background or whatever. Let's use the content aware tool. Now what the content aware tool does is it actually looks at and computes all of the data around that area to predict what would be in there if that area continued. So let's go OK. And there you go. Look at that kind of magic in terms of replacement. Now if I want to get rid of her, now this is not going to work in all circumstances, obviously, but I'm just showing you this for some sort of practical demonstration. There we go. We got a belly button there. That's quite hilarious. There we go. Now if I go to the blur tool and I shrink this down a little bit and I kind of blur that out of the picture. There we go. You kind of have, you've got no idea now whether those characters were even there in the beginning. And then I can do something like open the gradient tool by hitting G. I can set this to foreground to transparent, and I can just put a sneaky little gradient across here, or kind of like that. Now you have no idea that there was any characters there in the first place, and the image is a lot cleaner Now you can use this to get rid of logos, to extend images if they're not big enough. There's so much you can actually do with this content aware tool. If I want her centered, and I put her kind of over here, you can see here, here's the rest of the image. If I want to get rid of that, and I don't want that excess image data, what I can do is I can go to image and then trim, and click OK. Now that data is gone. It trims all the excess. You can do this to actually shrink the size of your Photoshop document. Now say if I want to add some more area here, I can hit M for the marquee tool, select this area, then do Shift F5. Content aware, look at that. If I want to move her again, Shift F5, bam. Oh, this tool is so amazing. So now I've basically created a completely different image with the composition I want, and for all intents and purposes, your users have no idea what that image started out as. If I go back to the image before I trimmed, am I there yet? There we go. Oh, also that's another thing. If you hit marquee tool and you select some area, and then you hit V for select, you can actually move just that area. That's how that works. So if you had an image and you just wanted to move like a certain part of it, like this entire thing was merged, and you wanted to, first of all, let's unlock that. You wanted to move just this button, you could select it, hit V, then you can move that button, which works fine if it's kind of a button just on a colored background and it's very simple. Okay, so say I wanted to content aware here. I can probably see, I could just delete all of that because it worked fine without having it there. But there you go, I could select that whole area, then select this area. There we go, there's another content aware fill, and there you go. So I use this quite a lot for photoshopping of images and stock images and things where it doesn't have what I want, or I want to get rid of background junk which isn't really that important to my image or just kind of clutters it. I'll use a combination of content aware and depth of field by blurring certain parts, and if you blur things first, it's often easier to do content aware afterward. But there you go. So that is how I would kind of approach things, some basic tips and tricks there. Now I can't think of much else. What else could we do? Okay, here I have a nice trick that I can teach you guys. So let's get rid of this. Let's make a new layer. So let's say I make something kind of jagged. Let's get the pencil tool, make this a bit larger, zoom in. You can zoom in using the mouse wheel, or you can do Control plus and minus, or if you hit Control 0, it zooms to fit the screen. Control 1 is 100% zoom, and Control 0 is fit the screen. Say I draw something with the pencil tool, and say you have, let's say you're dealing with some situation where you have an image like this. This is the type of Pokemon, okay? This is what this is. Here's his little ears, and he has some like weird thing here, and here's his little legs. This is a pretty valid Pokemon. This is probably actually a Pokemon in one of the actual, I don't know, what are they up to? Pokemon Magenta or something. Probably up to like the 19th iteration. So I have this Pokemon, and I want to actually smoothen this out. There's various ways to do this. I could Control click to select and go to the select menu. Now the modify menu here is kind of useful. This is something you might use quite a lot. I can expand and contract that. So if I expand by 10 pixels, there you go. Oh, okay, I know what I just remembered. Here's the easiest way to make a border on your entire image really easily. So say I want a yellow border on this image. Here is the correct way to do it. Make a new layer, hit Alt backspace to fill with foreground. It does not matter what color this is. Now set the, there's this propagate frame thing. That is because of the animation there. Okay, I'm actually going to get rid of this animation because we don't really need it anymore. Let's get rid of all of that, and we can actually close this tab panel, this panel. Okay, here's this layer. First, fill it with anything, does not matter. Set the fill to 0% so that the image is not filled. Remember, the fill affects the image content but not layer styles. Double click on it and go to stroke. Set the stroke to be inside, and there you go. There's your border. Now if you want that to be over the top of everything, you can hit rasterize layer style, and there you go. Now it's a simple border that you can put on things. One thing I kind of like to do is do a double border. The easiest way to do a double border is to use inner glow and stroke. So if I go to inner glow, I can set this to normal, opacity 100, set it to white. I can set it to precise rather than soft, set the size to 2. There you go. There's an inner border. I can leave that as is. The range here actually affects various things. You probably want range on 0 if you're doing border stuff. Now I can bring this back to 2, and I can set this to whatever color I want. And then I can rasterize that layer style as well. You don't really have any reason to do that. And there you go. Now if you wanted to make multiple variations that had that border on them, you're probably going to want to merge all of your groups by clicking Control E on them to merge them into a layer, and then just have this kind of at the top above everything as you save for web. Okay, going back. You don't need that anymore. Go back to our Pokemon. So here's our Pokemon, and he's on the top of, he's just on a white background. Now I want to actually smooth this. So if I Control Select him, go to Select, Modify, Smooth, I can apply a smoothing function there. There we go. Now that has given me a smooth selection. If I go to a new layer and I hit Shift F5 or Alt Backspace, which is the shortcut for fill with foreground, there we go. That gives me the evolved form of that Pokemon, and it's a bit smoother, but it's still not great. That kind of was too intense in terms of the smoothing. I want more control. So I'm going to delete that. Here's what you do. Click on this guy. Now click this layer mask button here. So control click him to get a selection, and click this layer mask. Now here this gives you a layer mask, which is always in black and white. And if I double click that, I can see some properties for that. Who cares? Now what we can do is actually do a blur of this. Now the point of the blur is to actually blur out these the jagged edges. So if I make sure you're clicking on the layer mask to select them, if I go to filter and blur, be aware there's lots of different filters in here for you to play with. I won't even get into those. I want to do a Gaussian blur. Now I can sort of preview what's going on here. It only changes the mask, so it doesn't really change the raw image. Now I want to zoom in a bit and see how smooth that's looking. Have I smoothed out the jagged edges? So 3 pixels is probably fine. Now that's now got a 3 pixel blur on it. Now if I actually hit Control L to edit the levels of this image, adjustments, levels, what I can do now is kind of drag these together, and what this will do is actually smoothen out the actual mask. So I'll show you a preview of what this will look like in the channels panel. So here he is here. So no. Let's make a new mask here. There we go. That's what he looks like. When I blur this and I hit Control L and I move these levels closer together, this is what it's doing. So you can see it's kind of smoothing things because it's modifying the white and black content essentially. Say I move it to there. That's a lot smoother. And I click OK. I can now control click that and select it to then use that selection to make a new layer, fill it with our Pokemon, and there you go. He's a lot smoother. But the quicker way to do that is actually to just use this layer mask, which affects the displayed content of this layer, and then just edit its levels directly. So you can see the effect, the smoothing effect it actually has. You can see here it's not doing much, and that's because the layer mask is too wide and it's not altering the original content. If I go down here, there you go. Here's now our smoother Pokemon. So that's a cool way to actually smooth things if you actually do need to do that. Hopefully you never will need to do that because it's kind of time consuming playing with all of the stuff. But now he's there we go. There's our Pokemon. He can be called AMCmon, and he can be white, and this can be his label. rotate that a little bit. There we go. That is the one thing that we will produce in this Photoshop bootcamp. Okay, I'm getting a bit off track doing fun things. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. Photoshop is one of those programs where you just kind of want to dive in and start doing things to get a feel for how it works and to kind of streamline your workflow. But hopefully some of the things I've shared, like the hotkeys, the basic things like changing brush size, selecting layers, aligning stuff, moving stuff around, animations, layer styles, all of these kinds of things will help you just do things a lot faster. Now, as part of this bootcamp, I'll include a lot of resources as well, like various social elements and ribbons and things that you can actually use for your banners and campaigns. So here you go. Here's various... Okay, yeah, get out of here. Here's various social elements. What is this doing? Don't resolve. Okay, so you can use these in your campaigns or on your banners or on your landing pages. They're just very, very easy to use things. Now, if you want to use these, the easiest way to do so is to open this document. Everything is kind of grouped into groups and layers. So let's shrink this guy down so we have more view here. So I want to select all of these. Can I go to layers and is there a way to collapse all? There must be a way to collapse all. I can't even tell you what it is. Okay, but I'm going to collapse some of these so it's a bit easier to navigate. There you go. There are all of these various ribbons and things. Now if I go to this one, for example, and I want to use this thing here, if I control click this, you can see I've selected tweet. This is within some sort of group here. So it's this Twitter button, right? If I want to actually make my life a bit easier here, I can go to auto select group. And then when I select these, it actually selects the group. But it's not selecting the deep group, it's selecting kind of the top group. But in any case, let's go to this Twitter button, say I want that. The easiest way to then use this in this image here, for example, is to right click on this and go to duplicate group and then tell it to duplicate it into the other document. And there you go. You can tweet about AMCMon. So you can set up these stock templates so you can duplicate from them into other documents that you are working with. Right, there we go. And the last thing that I will mention is the actions panel. So this is here. You can record actions. So let's make a new action called test. Now it's recording. I can stop recording, start recording. Say we want to do an operation in bulk to a lot of things. We can go new layer. You can see that is recorded. We can use the brush tool, which is on pencil. We can draw this. Now, if you want to actually automate that, you can go to Automate, Batch. You can go to Default Actions and find your test action here. Now, you can select a source folder of images, or you can select all of the images you have open, and then you can tell it what to do. So you can say, take all of those files and then do this action, then save and close them, or export them all to some sort of folder. Say let's export to, not there, let's go to our Photoshop Bootcamp. Let's override that action as well. This option is on files we save to the destination folder only by save as steps. Okay, no, we don't want that. And then let's go, let's actually open various things. So let's open all of these. Okay, don't resolve. Automate, batch, test action, open files, destination folder. We'll choose our Photoshop Bootcamp folder and then go OK and watch some magic. Right, so that's pretty much it. I will see you in the later modules.